Alright, YouTube, it's time for Occult Literature video number 94 on magic plants. Now, quickly, this is not an herbal. The herbals are going to come later. This is actually an academic work, a translation made by Edmund Goldsmith, which is a funny name. It's like, does it mean goldsmith? And he just spelled it improperly. Was he drunk that night or something? But no, it's actually Goldsmith. I have a work of his on incantations as well that I'm editing right now. This is a 28-page work, but it's exceptionally dense. It goes into more secondary sources than you'd possibly believe. It actually combines the sort of magic vegetable tract that it's a translation of, De Vegetabilis Magicus. It combines that with some Burning Times material, actually, as if to illustrate the danger involved with individuals who were actually wise. They understood herbal healing and so forth, and then were persecuted. Specifically, it speaks of witching ointment number 1, which we now know to be, generally speaking, it was an herbal concoction using datura or belladonna or one of these other substances, maybe smoked henbane or something like that. Speaks of that, and also speaks of Satan giving sort of the witches a mysterious black powder that was some sort of poison to, poison the wells, kill the cattle, kill children, and so forth. Now, as always, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon, a second link to my books blog, many other academic materials available, among other things, alchemy, grimoires, folk magic. It's literally all there, Kabbalah. This work is interesting primarily because it delves into the history of this subject matter. Again, it is a translation. It's a very early 1700s era tract, retranslated in the mid 1800s, with its own author's sort of preface and so forth. It covers the Egyptian sort of origin of the basic concept of herbal healing. The reason I don't class it with the herbals is that it goes mostly into philosophical and historical material. But it does speak of, for instance, the Egyptians had a practice. They divided sort of their deities and so forth up into a sort of crude numerological system. Therefore, if a plant had a certain number of petals on the flower, a certain number of leaves, a certain number of veins on the leaves, a certain number of clusters of berries or something like that, they would assume that it corresponded to some sort of deity, and through processing this herbal material, that was the practice of medicine, essentially speaking. Anything that looked like the sun, obviously, had to do with their sun god Ra. Then you have as well, within this work, the idea of the Asclepion. And what that is, that these sort of pagan healing centers in antiquity, the idea was a person would sleep in one, and the deities would visit them and give them some sort of sign as to what process should be used to heal certain diseases. It later then becomes, of course, standardized. You don't really get herbals until later, until at least the sort of the Roman and Greek periods. Early on in further antiquity, you have general concepts behind the medicinal use of herbs, but you don't really get encyclopedic works listing these sort of standardized measurements, recipes, and formulas, specifically what sort of diseases they cure and so forth. And the sort of Burning Times material here, I have to assume, although Goldsmith doesn't mention this, I don't know why, I have to assume this was predominantly thrown in, again, just to show the risks of people who understood herbal medicine, which in those days was basically the best they had. I mean, the Egyptians, they could do trepanning and so forth. They could do crude, sort of things on teeth and things like that, things of that nature, basic surgery. They had copper instruments. Later on, you get these with bronze and iron later in Rome. But at the same time, it was mostly herbalism. At the time, herbalism, or here, sacrifice a chicken and hope you get better, and then call me in the morning if you're still in the land of the living and not delving down into Tartarus or something like that. And of course, people who were knowledgeable about these things were at great hazard. The most wise were typically the most persecuted in those eras. So it's an interesting work overall. Again, it's rather short, but it's also extremely dense. It probably mentions over 100 other philosophers within this actual text. And I had heard of the text before, but I'd never actually realized that it had been translated into English in the pre-modern period. It is actually astonishing. I can't even remember exactly how I came upon this one. I think it was while I was researching other herbal materials. So again, as always, link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon, second link to my books blog. That's about all. Peace out.